What's up, guys, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Lieutenant Nathaniel Flint of the Landship Scorpios, and today we're finally getting into the Aerial Aces expansion for Rivet Wars Reloaded. Today we're going to be going through the rulebook because out of all of the expansions, all the changes made for balance in Rivet Wars Reloaded, Aerial Aces did see what could be considered the largest amount of changes. So it doesn't really help getting into the unit stat cards or any of the action cards or anything if we don't fully understand the implications of them without understanding the rules that were made to aerial units in the game. So this is going to be a long video, and this one is going to be just the rule book and going through the, not the changes, we're just going to go through all the Aerial Aces rules and explain them and do our best to try to interpret what is going on in the changes. So if you know classic Rivet Wars, this will be, I guess, teaching the air rules as plainly as possible, as if they are law. We won't be pointing out each and every individual change. I will discuss some of the implications of some of the most major of changes, but we're going to just go through them as they are, and then we can talk about changes or anything in the comments down below. So this will be a long video, so without further ado, let's just start getting through the rule book here. So the first bit, really quickly, is that Aerial Aces comes with its own units and its own game pieces. So it just kind of shows it here. So these are the air units. It also includes 2 ground units and ground plugs that will more directly interact with air units and help with some of the balance of air units. But again, we'll save that for the stats. Also, air units have a thing underneath them, so they go on stands. But we're going to be talking about that in deployment as well as in movements and attacking and everything. So they're on a grid, so that will be discussed. But these are the stands that are pretty easy to put together for the games. They go right on top of them. And then this is what it will look like when it's being moved around the board. So there are some additional rules when you add Aerial Aces to a Rivet Wars game that you are playing. One of the easiest is that Aerial Aces includes with it new action cards that are directly related to air units. If you are not playing with the Aerial Aces or air units, these action cards can be a hindrance on the game. So if you already have them shuffled in, just immediately discard them as air card and draw a new one. That's how we play it in my homebrew table. But if you are playing with air units, you do shuffle these cards in, if you're keeping them separate, to your action card deck so that they can be in circulation. Also, air units bring in new types of units that interact with action cards and stats differently. So on the stat card, you'll see where the unit type is. For Rivet Wars Reloaded, these types are light air, which is shown by the gyrocopter here. Heavy air, which is showed by the Zeppelin bomber blimp. And air plug, which is a plug unit icon with a little wing attached. At the moment, these are only in relation to the hero air units, the hero air plugs, excuse me. But in the future, we might see air units that aren't heroes. So that's what's being shown right here. Also, many Aerial Aces units, air units, have a minimum movement, which is the amount that they must move. So when we get to air unit movement, we'll discuss this. So for now, let's start with deploying air units. Unlike other units in Rivet Wars Reloaded, air units are not deployed within areas or squares. So let's use this example down here, where we have an area, which are these squares. So this one is a 3x3. Actually, this one's also a 3x3. So they are made up of areas. Normally, you have a deployment grid like this, and they can be deployed in this area in any of the 4 squares. So you see how these work like this. However, with air units, they're going to be deployed on grids, which are the intersections between areas here. So this is showing us that when you have a deployment zone, a deployment token put down in an area, these are their deployment grids for air units, are these ones attached to it. So they're giving us different examples. So like these set up like this, these are where the deployment grids are, but not this one over here. Even though it would make sense for this setup, that's not how it works. And then if you have 2 that are intertouching like this, you get them like that. So you get it. Easy peasy. It's also important to know that air units have facing, while ground units really don't. It's not really that important to any of the base level mechanics. Air units will use what direction they are facing and 90-degree turns as big part of their usage. The example they give is the Red Baron, where they're like, hey, this is the front of the unit, so it should be always facing forward. Oh, I just realized that this could be a little misleading, because in with the Osprey and with the Buccaneer, their propellers are actually on their back, propelling them forward. And that is not their front. But with the more traditional biplanes, like the Red Baron's triplane, as well as Remy Funk and the Dorchester Bomber, their propellers are in the front. So that's a good rule of thumb. Also with the Scout units, they don't really have propellers that signify their front, but it's pretty obvious to know where their front is. Air unit models can only face in one of 4 directions in 90-degree increments. So the 2 areas adjacent to the air unit's grid in that are in the direction it's facing are its front area. Okay. Ooh. This is a little more difficult than I thought it would be. Ooh, when you're doing QA, reading things aloud is very different than reading them in your head. So I probably should have read these aloud. I am sorry. The 2 areas adjacent to the air unit's grid that are in the direction it's facing are its front areas. So when we have the Dorchester Bomber and it is facing forward, these 2 are its front areas. Meanwhile, these 2 are its back areas. So the Buccaneer, where the guns are facing, these 2 are the front areas, these 2 are the back areas. So how it's depicted in the rulebook is it will show you the picture right side up, and then it will have an arrow depicting where they're actually facing. So just be aware of that. But this is just kind of showing what it looks like if it uses the term front area and back area for the unit. But as you can see, it will be placed on the grid, and then it technically, quote unquote, takes up, in big quotations, these 4 areas surrounding it. This is going to be important when we discuss movement, but hyper important when we talk about attacking. And finally, deploying air plugs in air units. Deploying plugs into air units is just like with any other unit. However, air units can only have air plugs attached to their sockets, and air plugs can only be attached to air units. So what this means is that air units need to be inside their faction territory, which was discussed in the core books, in order to deploy plugs into them. They are based on what grid they're on, not what areas that they are on. You basically want them to be on a grid that is a part of their faction. Now let's go with combat with air units. I'm going to try to take this slow and read things as intended, because this could get dicey. So let's try to take this slow. During the combat phase, air units make their attacks one at a time, similar to ground units. Each air unit may only make its attack once per turn. This is basically telling us they work the same way as ground units. They can only attack once per turn. There's not any kind of weirdness based on whatever their stat is. And they do one at a time, just like you would do with ground units. In classic Rivet Wars, air units went first. So like when you got to the combat phase, you did all the air units first before doing all the ground units. This was done to just keep it a little bit simpler. In this, they seem to keep it more open-ended. It's easier to treat them like any other unit, as long as you are keeping track of who has already gone this turn. So they will move and attack alongside any other units, whatever you want, as long as you activate them and then do the attack and then do it all at once, and then you're done. Air unit combat phase sequence is select a grid containing a friendly air unit. That unit may make its attack using the attack sequence, and then you repeat 1 and 2 until you've selected every grid containing a friendly air unit. Simple, works very similar to the attack unit for ground units. Air units attack using the same attack sequence as ground units. However, checking range both to and from air units is determined slightly differently. So this means it's not going to make, this isn't really air-to-air rules because there isn't an attack sequence with grids. But when an air unit is attacking a ground unit, the areas do have attack sequences. So air units have to abide by that attack sequence, the same as any ground unit. We will discuss that when they start giving more examples. But this is just laying the groundwork, letting you know that there is basically working the same as ground units. Now we're going to be doing, this is where things are going to get very interesting. We're going to be checking the range from air units. So this is checking range, air to air and air to ground. When checking range from an air unit to another unit, count the number of areas from either of their front areas of the attacking unit to the target. Like checking range for ground units, you may only count diagonals to an area once. When checking range to a ground unit, count areas from the front of the air unit. When checking range from an air unit to another unit, count the number of areas from either of their front areas of the attacking unit to the target. So that's this to this, or this to this. Easy. Do excuse me, I had to read this a few times. I'm going to cut all that out. And we're just going to explain this open-ended. But just know that I had to read this a few times. I think it's more on me than them, how they had it worded. I'm sorry. It's a difference of trying to perform for a video and trying to read and understand the thing. I just need to take a second. So let's explain what is up here, but using a visual aid, that'll be a lot helpful. So when you are attacking, doing air to air, you are taking an air unit's front range. So we see we have this Osprey biplane, and we have it facing this way. So we have here, probably a lot better for you guys. All right, so we have an Osprey biplane. It is facing forward this way, facing at this Dorchester bomber. We do air-to-air range based on the front areas here. And the Osprey, we'll put up a card somewhere so that we can see the stats, has a air range of 2. So we see that it goes 1, 2. And now it can target any of the grids that the plane is in. So we can see that it only is within 2 air range of its front here. So it can attack those. But the targeting moves exactly like in ground ranges. So from this front, we also see 1 and then 1 diagonal 2 brings us within 2 air range of this bomber's back area, which can also be targeted. So that might be a little confusing, but yes, it's not, their attacks aren't directional based per se. It can do this attack as well. It's just based off of its front areas, not its back areas, for its attack. It only gets 1 diagonal, so it can't do 1, 2 to get into here. It can't reach this. That's in any way you cut it. That's 2 diagonals, but it's also far outside of its air range. And it can't attack this one and this one based on that. So if we had more areas up here that we could do 1, 2 and get up here just like that, it would be able to do that as well. It's able to attack everything. Simple. Now, when we're doing air to ground, it is the same thing. It's based off your front facing range, and then you get whatever your land range is. So we'll have the Dorchester stat up as well so that we can follow this along. So we're looking at the Dorchester stat block over there. We see that they have a land range of 1. So what we're seeing is that it's based off of the range from its front grids. So this could be a little confusing, but these actual front grids are considered a land range of 0. Huge quotes. So it can attack this guy here in its front range, but it can also attack 1 land range away. So it can attack this guy up here. You can attack this guy back here in its behind area because it's 1 land range away from its front areas. You can also get this guy over here and this guy over here. Now it only has a land range of 1, so it can't get this guy way over here. And it can't get this guy over here even though he's 1 away from his back areas. That's because it's based off this front area. Still got you? We're not that confused? Okay. And because it is attacking land units, it does still need to follow the attack grid order. So if we had, more units in here. Actually, I just realized that the Dorchester is a very bad example because its land-only attack is a blast attack. So it attacks everyone in the grid that it's attacking. So even if it couldn't hit certain units that are within it, which is also not true because they get dice against every armor type, it wouldn't really matter because he attacks everybody in the grid. So maybe we'll not use that example just yet. Whew, okay, did I lose you? I hope that's understandable. Took me reading this a few times, and honestly, several takes, I keep getting tripped up by it. I'm sorry, I'm not really good at reading this aloud, but the long and the short is basically what we just described. Now let's talk about something a little interesting. Let's talk about range to air units. When checking range from a ground unit to an air unit, count the number of areas from the attacking unit to the target using their air range. You may only count diagonally to an area once when checking air range. This is similar to ground range. If any of the areas adjacent to the target are within that attacking ground unit's air range, they can attack it. They can be attacked. So we use their example. The Polston quad gun has an air range of 2. We'll put that stat block somewhere so that we can see that nice and easy. But it has an air range of 2. What this means is that it's in this area here. So 1 air range away, it can attack this unit because one of the adjacent grids. Matter of fact, with its air range of 2 and 1 diagonal, it can attack this unit from any of these grids technically because all of these are within its air range. But we see that 1, 2 away, It also has this biplane kind of hidden down here. It can also attack this biplane because one of its areas that is adjacent to it is within its air range. But we can see that even though we can go 1, 2, that would be 2 diagonals. So this unit is fine. It cannot be reached with the 1 diagonal limit. So it is not within the air range. Simple, but it is a new rule for Aerial Aces and Rivet Wars Reloaded. So we are just keeping an eye on that. But it should be quite simple. It does simplify it. It does treat it more like ground ranges and movements. So it should be simple to understand. Hopefully I'm not complicating it. Air units attack special rules. So we'll throw up that Dorchester card again because it uses both of these. Some air units have special symbols next to their attack profiles, showing that it has one of the new special rules. These rules are an air-only attack and a ground-only attack. This is quite simple. The air-only attack with that little symbol means that this attack only targets air units. So if it has a no mountains symbol, that means that it is only for air units. And then it has a ground-only attack with that no airplane symbol. This means that it can only target ground units. So we can see with the Dorchester Bombers attack profile, it gets 2 attack profiles. But the way that it works is it basically gets 1 only for air units and 1 only for ground units. So its ground unit 1 is quite powerful, as we can see, but the air unit 1 is a little bit less, and it is because it is only for those air units. But this isn't about stat blocks. Let's move on. And we're moving on to moving air units. So during the movement phase, a player may move each of their air units 1 at a time. Each air unit may only move once per turn. To resolve the movement phase for air units, follow these steps in order. You select the grid containing a friendly air unit to move. The air unit may move up to its move, which is that little boot value, but it must at least move its minimum move value. It shows the boot icon again. It's the one with all the carrots. So that one is a little bit mistake, but these are work in progress materials that we were given out. So it's fine. They probably caught it. During this movement, the air unit can make a single 90-degree rotation, changing its facing. So basically, you get to move up to your maximum movement speed, but if a air unit has a minimum movement, it must at least move that minimum movement. It can also make a single 90-degree turn anywhere within its movement, which isn't really explained here. So you can do up a little bit, 90-degree, up a little bit, as part of its movement. Repeat steps 1 to 2 until you've selected every grid containing a friendly air unit. So here we have moving along grids. So again, we're using the Dorchester Bomber. You see the Dorchester Bomber has a 3 movement and a minimum movement of 1. It must at least move to grid 1. So it shows it here. It moves forward along where it's facing. And it must minimally move at least to this 1. So it must move forward at least 1 movement. It does get to continue moving until at least up to grid 3 because of its 3 movement. An air unit may only move in a straight line, starting in the direction it is currently facing. An air unit can't move diagonally. An air unit can move into a grid containing another air unit, but it must end its movement in a grid with room for it to be placed. So I don't know if they'll show that later on in an example, but for instance, if this grid 2 had another air unit, let's say it's that Osprey from earlier, that Osprey biplane, It is able to move 1, which is its minimum, and it can move 3 and move through that unit as they're kind of flying around. It just cannot end its turn 2 in that occupied unit. It would need to continue moving all the way to 3. And here's what we said earlier. Once per movement phase, the air unit may change their facing by rotating 90 degrees on the spot. This may be done at any point during their movement, including at the beginning and at the end. So you are able to, 1, 2, change your 90-degree facing here. Well, technically it would be here, and then continue moving 3 up this way, now facing this direction. And that's basically it. They have a list of Aerial Aces special rules, which is still a work in progress. We are going to be covering this when we cover the stat cards. These will all come up and we'll talk about them. Aerial Aces solo rules, we're not really going to touch on this now. There is a good chance that I'm going to be talking about Colossus and the solo rules, but that's going to be a huge undertaking. It's going to be its own videos, and Aerial Aces solo rules adds a little stuff. So that'll probably be its own video, Aerial Aces solo rules. It'll be very small, and it'll be done when I do the Colossus stuff. And there's a whole list of Aerial Aces scenarios, which we'll be skipping today because that's a whole thing in and of itself. But it's nice to know that they added special scenarios that highlights the air units so that when you get Aerial Aces, you're able to instantly make use of those air units. And a little cheat sheet right at the end. So ladies and gentlemen, this is it for this video. That is the rule book. We basically went through all of Aerial Aces base rules for Rivet Wars Reloaded. We talked about some changes like how air range for ground units basically works, and a lot of other ranges and attacks work for air units as well. But I tried to cover them just as they are. There are a lot of changes with some interesting connotations. For instance, there's a lot of things to discuss about some of the changes to air units from classic Rivet Wars, the Battle of Brighton. There's a lot of things to discuss. For instance, with an air range of 1, this Dorchester bomber can be attacked by these two. But it also with an air range of 1, he can be attacked by this guy here shooting into his back, this guy here, and this guy here. Not this guy with an air range of 1. But I mean, that really opens up air units to ground units now. There's a big deal. AA units, like the Polston quad gun, have a much larger reach for units they can attack. In Rivet Wars Classic, I'm not sure if this is too confusing, but an air range of 1 would be these guys. It would be any... it's just getting the ability to attack air units that are basically adjacent to your area. And then having an air range of 2 was branching that out to other things in a straight line. Now, with it basically working similarly to the ground range, diagonals become a bigger thing, but also... I mean, air range of 1 counts for these guys now, too. So that has some implications to basically air units on the whole can basically be touched so much easier. But also, air units on the whole can touch units so much easier. The Dorchester bomber used to only be able to touch ground units in like a ground range of 1 was only these units. Now it includes this unit here, this unit here, this unit here. So I mean, they also have extended reach. This is going to be huge for some of the like scout units, like the gyrocopter, who only have a ground range. Yeah, they only have a ground range, and they're pretty slow, but that 1 ground range now means so much more. Also, it leads up to, like, some of the like the scout units, like the gyrocopter and the scout zeppelin, since all their ranges are based off their front-facing ones and not their back-facing ones. But their whole flavor is that their facing really doesn't matter that much. But I guess it does matter in Aerial Aces in Rivet Wars Reloaded. So does that buff them? Does that weaken them? It's a lot of implications for the units. Also, with air units being able to touch so much more, it really makes minimum movement really be a bigger deal. Also, one thing that isn't really touched on in these rules, at least I might have missed it this time, it would have been in movement. Interesting. It does not seem to be brought up at all, but in classic Rivet Wars, you can move through units. You must move your minimum. You must move all this stuff. They did have a thing in classic Rivet Wars in Battle of Brighton that if bare minimum, you couldn't make any move at all. Your unit could not move into a valid intersection, a grid in this one, or if they could not move into a space without colliding with another unit. Basically, there was no valid moves. Basically, it considered that a collision, and you had to suffer an attack roll against the air unit. You were basically allowed to not move. I guess you could choose to make a 90-degree turn if you needed to in space. But basically, you were allowed to not move at all. But you suffered an attack roll against your unit, and it was called a collision. I'm very interested if with the units that we have and all the different variations, if that is just not a reality that can exist with one copy of Aerial Aces. So they didn't think that would be a situation that would really come up at all. But it would still be very interesting to me if that's even possible. But in theory, you could be in a situation where a unit with a minimum movement cannot make any valid movements. And they don't really mention that at all in these rules. I hope that I pointed that out. But in Classic Rivet Wars, that's called a collision. And you suffer an attack roll against that unit. So it'd be very interesting to see if that's something that could happen. But honestly, it's probably such a small inclination. You would most likely definitely need multiple copies of Aerial Aces to have enough planes on the board at any one time to make that a threat. And you would really need an attacking player to really try to force that into happening. So it's just interesting. But we've definitely talked enough about this, enough about some of the implications. If you guys want to talk more, comment section down below. I'd be very interested in your opinions. The discussion around Aerial Aces has already been quite heated, it's quite lively, quite a lively discussion. So I'm very interested in what you think, getting that out there. This will definitely be a video when it eventually comes up, talking about the Aerial Aces stat cards, about what this means for units. We've already seen some units gain an air range in the rebalance, like the Allied Riflemen now have an air range. So with Panzerfaust and Riflemen having air ranges, that kind of changes up the meta. So our air units going to be joining the ground units in the meat grinder, which is Rivet Wars gameplay. Are they still a formidable foe out there on the battlefield? Is it enough to have air superiority? Does that still mean something? Or is it really not that big of a deal anymore? And they have some special rules and some special ways to play that are flavorful, but are they basically just adding more units to the game board now? There's a lot of different discussions that could be had about this. So let us know what you think. And without further ado, I'm going to cut it off. This video will definitely be long enough as is. But we will be covering Aerial Aces stat cards in another video. We'll do a thing here that's like, hey, Aerial Aces stat cards. So you can go over there and check that when it is out. But without further ado, why don't you go check out the other videos? We talk about the core units. We are already branching out into the expansions. We kind of really blasted through the Nemoans, which is a big popular video that's definitely getting the most views right now. So go check out the other videos going through all of this work in progress material that was given out to us about all the changes in Rivet Wars Reloaded. Let me know what you think, and we will definitely be covering the stat cards down the road. I'm super excited for it. I really think that there's a lot of good here. I think there's a lot of change that only extended time playing. I think this is, out of all the changes that have happened, Aerial Aces is the biggest, and it's the most one that'll say, I don't know, we're just going to have to play with these new rules. On the plus side, you can play Rivet Wars Classic with these changed rules and start getting an idea of what it means for air units. Are they much more vulnerable, or are they just now more meat grindery? Is it a good thing that they're easier to shoot down now? Is it a bad thing? Does it not matter? Or if, with all the knowledge at hand, will we not really notice that much of a difference? You'll just have to play them a little differently, and they'll still be a menace on the battlefield. It all depends with how you think Battle of Brighton was in Classic Rivet Wars, how it changed your table when you played with those units or not, and how you feel that that's going to be affected by these changes. For me, Battle of Brighton really changed the game. Air units were a huge force. When one side chooses to deploy air units, ignoring them is not an option. You need to change them. For me, I usually get stuck playing Blight often, and I really didn't enjoy Blight air units very much. I think there's a lot of big changes that are really good for Blight air units, which we'll talk about then. But for me, I really thought that Blight didn't benefit from Aerial Aces that much. Minimum movement was not that big of a hampering, so it wasn't that big of a deal. And for me, I really just wanted the AAs to be stronger. If you didn't want to play with the planes, I really wanted an option for basically the ground units to be a little bit better. For me, Allied planes, that Dorchester bomber is a killer, and ignoring it wasn't an option. AA wasn't really that good. But with these new rules, the AA units, or anything with multiple air range, is a big deal. They have a wide reach to go against these air units. And I think that'll be a good buff. But if I was a person who really loved air units, I feel like a lot of the normal light aircraft, what used to be the attack, the fighter class, so like the Osprey plane, the Buccaneer, like a lot of those are going to be really touchable by ground units now. Remy Funk, the Red Baron. So like choosing to deploy them will be a big deal, but also keeping them deployed and fighting against the ground units and stuff is going to be a bigger deal. I feel like it's going to be adding them more into the meat grinder, which I feel like is a good thing. Rivet Wars in general gets that feeling of the World War I meat grinder really well. And I do feel like having the planes join in with that more reflects World War I and kind of like that meat grinder feel that Rivet Wars does so well. So I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. One thing's for sure, we will definitely discuss it more when we go through the air units, the changes that have been made to them, and exactly what that what that will look like when all things are said and done. So I think I've rambled on enough. Why don't we call that good? Thank you guys so much for watching. I enjoyed this video. I hope you did as well. And we will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.